if we're in the United States of America, how can it be that a broadcaster has to think what some politician is going to think of whatever they say?
They think a university has to be free, a newsroom has to be free, journalists have to be free. But businessmen, the government can tell them to do whatever the government wants to tell them to do. That's control not over ideas, but over money, commerce, trade, profit. The fact that the government has so much control over money, commerce, business, these business entities, that impacts freedom of speech, and like in a major way.
The Trump administration, in the brief time it's been in office, has been active in trying to suppress content that it thinks of as biased, radical left content. The administration wants to defund NPR and PBS and has been pulling or threatening to pull funding from major universities like Columbia and Harvard, in part because of the content that these organizations and institutions produce. One ongoing episode that deserves more attention than it's getting is the administration's feud with CBS. Trump is personally suing CBS for billions of dollars because of a Kamala Harris 60 Minutes interview. And a federal agency, the FCC, is investigating CBS for news distortion. Is this right? What about the Trump administration's mainstream critics? Are their objections and counterclaims right? And if not, what is the legal and philosophical logic that explains what's going on? Those are the questions that we're going to try to get to the heart of today on the Ayn Rand Institute podcast. I'm Marek Michulka, a junior fellow here at ARI, and with me is Onkar Ghate, senior fellow. Excited to be here.
Yeah, hi Marek. It's an important topic. Yeah, let's first talk about some of the context here in regard to what the dispute or disputes are about with the Trump administration and CBS. So the Trump's sort of personal lawsuit is about CBS. I mean, it was 60 Minutes, the news program, doing an interview of Kamala Harris. This is pre the election, and it's, as is normal practice, and if you've ever watched CBS News, I mean, and including 60 Minutes, but television news in particular, it's heavily edited. Like they might interview somebody for an hour, and then 5 minutes is a lot of airtime if you even use that much. I've actually been interviewed by news programs, the television news, and they might interview. I did one. I think I'm trying to remember what it was with CNN. I think that was, we probably spent 2 hours and less than a minute aired. So this is common practice for television news to heavily edit and cut interviews that they do. But the allegation is that they edited it in a deceptive way that made Harris look better, and that is, I mean, there's various kinds of claims, including I don't know if they officially have done this in the lawsuits, but they certainly floated the kind of idea like this is election interference, this is malpractice in terms of being a journalist, and he's suing for billions of dollars. And then there's, the latest is they're in settlement talks for something in the millions of dollars. And we can come back to what it means that they're in settlement talks for that. So that's the personal one. But then there's also the sort of the administration itself, and that's through the FCC, that's supposed to be an independent agency, but it's an agency of the executive branch. And if one thinks of the president as you're the head of the executive branch, then it's the executive branch that's doing so. And then, so you were, Marek, particularly interested in the involvement of the FCC. So what is the sort of the basis of the complaint or allegations here?
Yeah, so when it comes to the FCC, one of the things that they have power and jurisdiction over is who gets broadcasting licenses. So who's like allowed to broadcast on these television channels. And one of the ways that they determine that is these issues of is the content biased or is it unbiased? Um, and so the parent company of CBS right now, Paramount, is attempting to merge with another company, Skydance. And in order for that to happen, what basically needs to go on is that the broadcasting licenses from Paramount need to be transferred to the sort of merged entity. And because there's concerns, or at least because they claim that they're concerned about the biased content that CBS is putting out, the FCC has sort of declared that they're interested in stopping that merger from going through, or at least stopping the broadcast license transfer. Um, and so one of the things that I was interested in.
Well, I'll just put a third thing on this. So, because I think like there's three elements to it. There's two FCC elements. So there's Trump's lawsuit against CBS, 60 Minutes, and I mean ultimately it's against Paramount because Paramount's the owner of it. There's the Paramount merger with Skydance, but there's also the FCC just investigating Paramount slash CBS slash 60 Minutes for news distortion. So there's sort of two angles that the FCC is. Because CBS is a licensee, and it's really, I mean, it's even more complicated because it's not the national news organization that the FCC has jurisdiction over, it's local affiliates. So they're actually investigating a local affiliate that broadcast. I mean, 60 Minutes is a national program, so various affiliates broadcast. So they have to target a particular affiliate because the FCC has jurisdiction over that, and that the interview itself is news distortion. And then there's also, well, but you want to merge with Skydance, and because it's a, as you were saying, it's you have to officially transfer the license. Any transfer of a license comes under FCC jurisdiction, so they also can look into that. So there's sort of two ways in which they're looking into CBS slash 60 Minutes because of the power that the FCC wields and has been granted.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And one of the things that I'm interested in is just what does that do to companies like CBS and to other broadcasters, other people who are making intellectual content, right? Because the way I see it, in effect, is like what's gone on is there was a specific item of content that was shared, that was produced, and it's like what it was something that Trump personally didn't like because he's suing them, and that he's then gotten the government involved in going after. And so yeah, so it's like what is happening, like what is the broader thing that's going on here as well. Yeah, and sort of like what kind of environment is that creating?
Yes, and I think part of why you got interested in this, and rightly so, is that it seems nakedly against the First Amendment.
Yeah.
And that because it seems very upfront that CBS and 60 Minutes is being targeted for the specific content. Um,
Specific thing even.
yeah, so it's the that it's content that Trump doesn't like, and it's viewed as promoting a cause that he disliked. In this case, the Democrats. That the um, the First Amendment, if it does anything, it prohibits the government from targeting somebody's speech for the specific content of that speech, that the government doesn't like it or some government official doesn't like it, and it seems, I mean, if not obvious, almost obvious that that's what's going on. And when you look at the FCC, the outgoing chairman, who I think, I mean, so left, I mean, likely would have been fired if didn't leave. I think in January. I mean, just as the new administration took over in January, dropped. So people can make complaints to the FCC that you should investigate this licensee and that licensee because I think they're not behaving properly. And there were complaints against CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox News. And she dropped them all before she left. And the new chairman, Brendan Carr, reinstated the ones against ABC, NBC, and CBS, not Fox News. And that, again, like it just smacks of, okay, we're targeting the people whose content we don't like, who disagrees with the administration or is seen as disagreeing with or critical of the administration and its policies. And that, again, just seems like it's straight, you're being targeted because of your content.
Yeah, and so I mean, when I think about the spirit of the First Amendment and sort of what got me interested in this in the first place, it was now all of these broadcasters, they have to think when they are producing something, when they're making something new. It's does like it has to enter their mind what the Trump administration is going to think about this content, if it's sufficiently large, if it's going to get even get on his radar. That's the kind of thing that they have to be thinking about. And I mean, if we're in the United States of America, as part of how I think about this, like how can it be that how can it be that a broadcaster has to think what some politician is going to think of whatever they say, right? It's like that's so against the spirit of the law and like in the real meaning of that law.
Yeah, and it will often be put as it has a chilling effect. And another way of putting it is that part of the way that censorship works is that it relies on self-censorship, particularly in countries that are nominally more free. So if you have something like China or Russia, the government will just pull down all kinds of content, imprison people, and so on. If a government in a Western country is not going to do that, then what it's going to do is make it that apparent that the cost of the speech are pretty high, so that a company, a news organization has to think, is it worth the cost? Is it worth the price? We might be sued. We might be dragged into court. And like, if you know anything about legal proceedings, they go on for years and they're very expensive. And so they have to think, is it worth it? Is this sufficiently newsworthy, or that we think it's very important to get this out, so that, yeah, we'll risk the fact that the administration or the FCC might come after us, versus all the times where it will be, no, maybe it's not worth it. Let's tone this down, or not report this, or not have an opinion piece on this. And you don't see all those things, and you don't see the government taking them down as you do in China, or putting up a wall that you can't get. But it nevertheless is censorship. But what they're relying on is the private actors to censor themselves. Yeah, if I were free, I would say this, but I'm not really free to do this, so I'm not going to do that. There's other things, yeah, I will do, and I will say, and I will take risks. And the First Amendment, if one understands its real purpose, it's government shall make no law abridge, and that takes out the government can't try to intimidate, penalize, so that people start self-censoring, and so it doesn't have to have this whole apparatus that's going to police everything and take down content, because people are policing their own content. Is this something the government will favor, or will it look unfavorably on, and then I might be in trouble if that happens? And so that, as it's put, it's a chilling effect that effect is real, and it's really damaging to freedom of speech.
And so I think like focusing on the chilling effect, like one of the things that um, that creates it is that it's not just that the CBS thing is going on. And it's not just like sort of one action in one area where you could feel like, because if that were true, then maybe other people in different areas that like there wouldn't be this broader sort of effect. Um, and one of the things that we brought up at the beginning of the podcast, like in the intro, was that there's a whole bunch of different kind of actions that Trump is taking against companies, public and private, like organizations, whether they're publicly funded or privately funded, right, to sort of suppress the Trump administration is doing that to sort of suppress different ideas that it disagrees with, right? And I think when you see it as it's going after new broadcasting organizations, universities for what's going on in their classrooms, and then even when it's like taking somebody off the street, like Rumeysa Öztürk was, in March, that for writing an op-ed, like even individuals, it's like all of these different categories of speech are on the table that you at least have to think about, right? Like if you're against all of his political enemies, like if you're an immigrant or if you're a leftist or if you're any of these things, like it might enter your mind that who knows exactly what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, and I think it might enter your mind, and it part of the projection of the power to. So it's not just doing this; it's doing it very publicly, and so for the CBS and the FCC. I mean, Trump has been hammering on this for months and months, including on his platform, which obviously, like Truth Social, which has millions and millions and millions of followers. So, this is very visible what they're doing. The what they're doing against the universities again is deliberately very visible. Including calling them out publicly, bringing them before Congress, and if you think of the immigration, with obviously the things that are going on now in regard to the protest, but part of the protest are because the show of force of trying to round up and deport people is, again, I think, deliberately very public. And so if you think of it like that, and then as you were saying, that you're going to target like an individual student for an op-ed that they wrote, as though, and part of the allegations were this op-ed can create national security concerns, like that which is a farce. That the idea that an op-ed in a student newspaper is a national security concern, but what it conveys is, we can reach anywhere. And to say that, like, someone might think about that, I think the intent is they want people to think about this. Like, to make it so public is that it won't be, oh yeah, okay, if I so happen to be in the media and know something about what's happening with CBS, it might enter my mind. But no, it's just like any person can see that this is going on, and they want the people to see that this is going on, so that they have this in part of their thinking. Like, is it worth the risk of criticizing Trump officials, and so on? And when you read about some of the, for instance, news organizations, more and more reporters talk about, yeah, this is a kind of thought, and it's also like a business decision. And so part of what's been happening at CBS is one of the, for 60 Minutes, the senior editor, or I forget, senior editor or senior producer left, because it's now, I don't have the editorial control that I used to have, but you could understand from a corporate perspective why the corporation, like if we're being sued, and it's sued for billions of dollars. Now, I don't think even if there's a settlement, it's going to be in the billions, but it becomes, yeah, well, there's a a monetary cost here potentially. So we have to scrutinize this, and maybe it's not worth credit. Like this is too small an issue to criticize the administration about, and and so that it's actually happening. So that I mean, I think there's a fair amount of evidence that the chilling effect is actually happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so then, what do you think of the people who are the way that these kinds of institutions, that CBS and that Harvard and all these people are sort of responding to the ways that it's going in, and we can focus in on some if you want. But like one of the things that I keep hearing, and it's like everywhere. I'm sure everybody's heard it. Is this idea that like Trump is a threat, or the Trump administration, his actions are threats to like democratic institutions, and I always think of that as a sort of interesting way of putting it, right? Because when you call it a democratic institution, that's putting it at the level of the system of government, right? It's not like I mean, it's different slightly than public institution, even though it has a similar flavor, right? But it strikes me that like they're not talking about, the Trump administration like maybe flouting the Supreme Court, which you might think, oh yeah, that's like maybe trying to skirt an institution, like a Republican institution, the Supreme Court, or things with Congress. So what do you think of what's actually meant by that? And like, is it going on? Like, how do I think about that?
Yeah, I think of that as, I think it's right to focus in on that as one of the things that is often said in opposition and criticism of what the Trump administration is doing. And you put it, well, you could call it, it's a Supreme Court, you wouldn't call it democratic institution exactly. You put it as a Republican institution. A similar but different way of putting it is the institutions of a free society. And a free society is not a democracy in the sense of unlimited majority rule. But when you put it as it's undermining or interfering with a democratic institution, what you're activating, whether you know it or not, is this is interfering with what the majority wants, or what the majority says, or what the majority should have control of. And one of the pushbacks then against the critics is, yeah, but Trump was elected. And he was elected with a bigger margin of victory in 2024 than in 2016. This is what people expected him to do. It's not like it was some secret that he railed against the media, viewed them as destructive, as undermining the country, I mean, he would sometimes label them as like outright enemies of America. And so that this is, that he would be an opponent of the media, and then would think, like, if you really think they're enemies of the country and so on, that to the extent that the laws will permit you to take action, that you would take action against it. Like, it can't, you're beyond naive if it was, oh, I didn't think this would happen. It's similar in regard to the immigration. It's, look, we ran on this. We ran on deporting millions of people. So what do you mean that now when we get and we win election, so that is like, aren't we representative of the democratic opinion or democratic will? We have to do this now. Like, we would be going against democracy if we didn't do like that. That's the counter argument. And it's not clear why the people, there's something further to say about why that objection is made. But it's why they think, oh no, that the Trump administration, no, it's not really democratic and it wasn't elected and so on. Like, that's not a plausible position any more than when Trump says the 2020 election was stolen. That's completely bogus. But it's also bogus to say like the 2024 election was stolen and Harris should have won. And so they won the election. And if what you're going to pin it on is it's a democratic institution versus a free institution, or the institution of a free society, Those are very different criticisms. And there's something right about thinking of it as this is incompatible with the institutions of a free society. But that, if one thought of it like that, you would have to think about other things than what these critics and objectors are thinking about. And they are and I think this is one of the things that interested you about the phenomenon, and sort of the dispute. It's really important to bring in the the third element, and it's important that there's three elements here. That there's Trump's lawsuit against CBS for that there's something deceptive in how they edited Harris's interview. And I've seen many critics say something to this effect, is sometimes in pretty much these words, that that would criminalize every editorial room in the nation because they all make these kinds of editorial decisions. And you might object and think this is a poorly edited interview. And I mean, again, to anyone who's done media interviews, that basically if you've done about five, you're going to have one where you think, yeah, I don't agree with how they edited this. It makes me either say something I didn't really say or puts an emphasis on that's not what I was emphasizing. And if you look at the whole transcript, you will see that's not, but like this kind of editorial decisions are made all the time. And anybody, part of the point is anybody with some media experience, which Harris certainly has, but Trump certainly has, knows this happens all the time. So if this lawsuit succeeded, it's right to think like the editorial rooms across the nation, newspapers, television programs, so all of a sudden what they do would be, it's illegal. So like that's a major, major thing, and it's right to object to that. And then they also object to the FCC, that this is sort of intentionally deceptive on this, because that's part of what the FCC is contending. But they don't bring up the third element, or if they bring up the third element, they're okay with it, which is the FCC investigating Paramount and Skydance's merger. And I think it's revealing that they will only focus on two of the three strands here, and either sort of just don't talk much about, well, the FCC is investigating these companies because they want to merge, or we'll say, yeah, like, what's the problem with that? And that tells you something about they're not thinking about free speech in the proper way.
So I'm not actually sure I understand that point. What is the significance of the fact that they're not looking at all three?
Well, do you think the FCC investigating Paramount, and so Paramount owns CBS, which owns 60 Minutes, so investigating all this, and it's the merger with Skydance. Did you think that's relevant to what's going on? Like, is it relevant to the other two?
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like the first two are for sort of more content issues, and then this is another like seemingly unrelated business issue, which is being investigated, and it's yeah,
That's how they treat it. That's how the critics are treated. And but the real, or a question, but an important question is it right to treat it like that?
right. And well, you brought up that this is that you're right that this aspect is something that I was interested in, and particularly that it criminalizes a lot of what you put as criminalizing every editorial room. And one of the other things that I've been interested in that I've been writing about is antitrust. And I think there's something really similar about these two kinds of issues, right? Where both of them, the structure of the law is such that there's no way to know when you're in the right, when you're safe, and anything that you do is potentially criminalized, right? So in the same way that, Ayn Rand would always talk about, like, well, she wouldn't always talk about it, but she talked about a lot of the way that businessmen are being persecuted by antitrust laws. I think there's a similar thing that's like slowly coming in with all sort of major speech activities, that they're kind of falling into that issue, like into that same kind of category.
Yeah, so just as if you think about what we were talking about, the chilling effect, as it will often be put, I was putting it also in terms of, I actually like it better because it brings up the important that it's self-censorship. So it brings up that there's censorship going on, even though it doesn't look like, say, what's happening in Russia or China. It doesn't change the fact that the government is involved in censorship when it's intimidating people for the content of their speech. So there's a chilling effect, and part of what that means is there's a kind of guessing game. If I write this editorial critical of some Trump official policy action of the administration, if we teach this course at Harvard, uh, if we air this edited interview, will the administration object? And will they object sufficiently that they start threatening us? We might pull your license, or we might pull your funding for some at Harvard, for some unrelated, they give funding to scientists because of something going on in a humanities course, and that they have to guess is they have no way of knowing what's going to happen. Most of the time, the government officials couldn't tell you in advance what they're going to do. So you become focused on the bureaucrats, their whims, and winning their approval. Um, and there's something that is an exact parallel in regard to the antitrust law. You can't look at the laws and, like, Paramount and Skydance can't look at the laws and say, oh yeah, like, obviously this merger can go through, or obviously this merger is prohibited by the law. It's that the law gives the bureaucrats certain kind of arbitrary powers to look into this and to decide on a case by case basis, which ultimately means to decide by the seat of their pants. What do I think? Is this should we permit this merger or should we not? And so the businessmen involved in this are in the exact predicament of these people in, say, in the editorial rooms, of we have to try to anticipate and guess what some officials are going to do, and are they going to look approvingly or disapprovingly on this merger. And sometimes we'll try to sort of grease the wheels, and if that's not outright bribes, it will be, look, like, yeah, here's reasons why we want to merge, don't you think that's okay, and so on. So they're trying to placate. And in this case, part of what's going on is there's, well, let's put it, that there's allegations that Paramount wants to settle the law. So the personal lawsuit that Trump has launched against CBS 60 Minutes, Paramount wants to set, not for like the 10 or 20 billion dollars but for 10 or 20 million dollars, because as a price of getting the merger through. That, okay, if we do this, they'll permit the merger of Paramount and Skydance. And if one doesn't think, well, that's a free speech issue, then you're not understanding what freedom of speech is about. That if, like, they have to settle a lawsuit about something, content that they published, that is legal under the First Amendment, should be legal in a free society, but they have to pay damages, or I mean, pay alleged damages, I mean, to Trump in order for the FCC, then the FCC might permit this merger. And that should, one should think of that as like a banana republic, not a free society, that you have to do this. And yet that's what is going on in this situation. And the fact that they are not focused on, really, the FCC is going to prevent a merger between two media companies, and that they don't see that as a free speech issue. Um, there's, I mean, we can talk about more of why that is, but that, it's telling and damning, I think.
So, one of the abuses that, or sorry, one of the objections that people raise to this is like that the Trump administration is abusing power. That like it's otherwise good maybe, but that the specific way that the Trump administration is wielding it is abusive. It's overstepping its bounds. Um, and I think like one of the things that you're saying is like that's not at all what's going on, right? It's not as though that this is an otherwise good power that's being abused by the Trump administration, um, because like, and I think this is the way you put it to me one time, which is that like whenever you're thinking about an abuse, you then have to think about like what is the norm, or you know, like that implies a norm. You know, what is the standard by which it actually is abuse? And when it comes to these FCC laws, like the founding charter of the FCC is that it's supposed to dole out broadcasting licenses on the basis of the public interest. And I mean, that's like the public interest is literally quoted there. And so it's how is that actually supposed to happen? Like what does it mean that you're going to be giving out, like you're going to be telling people what they can and can't say. You're going to be allowing them to broadcast or not on the basis of that standard. And I mean, one really, like, you might try to square it with the First Amendment somehow, but it seems sort of difficult to make that work. And what ends up having to happen is you have individual people. I mean, maybe the best way, or the most, like, one sensible way to do it is exactly what's happening here, which is, you know, you sort of take a democratic vote, and then that all sorts it out, right? That if you have the most people who have elected certain officials to make this decision on their behalf, then, you know, they get to count as the public interest. And I think this is one of the reasons that some of the objections have fallen so flat out there, which is that, you know, they're in effect trying to talk about, you know, Trump is abusing power, he's doing these sort of unprecedented things without really challenging the essence of the law that is going into it.
Yeah. So, and there's a difference between, so I do think there's an escalation here, but escalation and abuse, or sometimes it will be put as abuse, sometimes it will be put as misuse, implies the earlier use of the power, that was proper, that was okay, now that power is being abused or misused. And if you put it as it's an escalation means like it's getting worse, but it doesn't mean like before it wasn't bad. It's escalating something bad. So I do think, as we were talking about, at the outset, it's pretty nakedly targeting people because of the content of what they're saying, and in that sense, just flouting the First Amendment. That if the government is to do something that impinges on people's speech, ability to speak, it will often be put, it has to be in a content neutral way. And there is sometimes a proper meaning to that. Oftentimes there's an improper meaning to that. Yeah, we're impinging on people's ability to speak, but we're not targeting them for their specific content. So that somehow is, okay, so that's not so bad in regard to the First Amendment. And that's true, it's not so bad. It is bad, though, it's worse to target, like you're targeting like these specific people or individuals or organizations because they're saying X, and the government is prohibiting people from saying X, whatever the X. If it's about DEI, if it's about, I mean, in that sense, it doesn't matter what the content is. And so when the government is basically saying, yeah, we can target people for the content of their speech, it becomes like more open that they're flouting the First Amendment. And in that sense, it's an escalation of we're not even pretending to be abiding by the First Amendment. But what has to be seen and understood is that legislation where the government is supposed to be policing the public interest has to be focused on content. So, like, here's to give a flavor, but as you said, like most of the objections to what Trump is doing, when they say, well, this is a misuse or abuse of power, will put, well, what the FCC is supposed to be doing is policing and making sure companies' activity, including media companies' activities, are in the public interest. And they think of that as, well, that's not about content. So this is the Center for American Progress, and it has an interesting thing on the Trump administration, like pre the administration, during the campaign, and then when Trump won and the administration takes power, of what they're doing against CBS and Paramount, and what the FCC is doing. So they give sort of a chronology of it. And then they say, this is what they write: this series of events raises troubling questions about how an independent agency, that's the FCC, so independent agency, can misuse regulatory powers, which, and then in dashes, which are meant to be exercised in the public interest in politicized ways. So their complaint is he's politicizing it. And it's true. Like, that's part of the escalation. It's targeting specific content, and it's targeting it because the administration politically disagrees with that content. So in that sense, politicizing it is, you're targeting content for political reasons. But when they say, well, the FCC is just supposed to be operating in the public interest, that means at least two things. The Trump administration doesn't represent the public. This goes back to the issue about, like, it's attacking democratic institutions. But the reply to that is, what do you mean we don't represent the public? We were elected. Like, if anybody represents the public, isn't it elected officials? And then it also means, yeah, but if you're preventing two companies from merging, why does that implicate freedom of speech? And it so obviously does. So if you tell two companies you can't merge your editorial news operations to be more effective, to reach more people, to be more profitable and so self-sustaining. No, the government says you can't do that. That affects people's ability to speak. It means, yeah, like, you want to merge in part because you think it will make you as a speaker, because here we're dealing with media companies, more effective. No, the government says you can't. It's not in the public interest to do that. And if you did that, you can do that in more overtly content-specific ways. Like, it's two organizations who, you don't want them, like Fox News and someone else, we don't want them to get even more powerful, so we won't allow this. You can do it in less obvious ways. But the only meaning of it is, we don't think a company this big doing the things that you would be doing, we don't think that's in the public interest. And that means you're prohibiting people from freely exercising their right to speak. And the fact that the critics don't see that, um, what that really means is they don't see that the FCC as such is an interference with freedom of speech.
So, if all of these objections that the yeah, if all of these objections are so sort of, I don't know, if they're so weak, if they really like don't seem to be grappling with the issue of like, hey, isn't Trump and his administration that was elected, aren't they the public? You know, where do you think it's coming from that like these objections are actually coming from? Do you think, oh yeah, well they're like well motivated, but they don't understand, the issue? Like, are they trying to defend the First Amendment, or is there something else going on?
I mean, I think some are well meaning, but clueless about the deeper meaning of the First Amendment. Some, I think, are, um, they will defend freedom of speech only when they see it as personally affecting them, not when they see it as affecting other things. Like the two media companies that they can't merge, the government's just going to say you can't merge. Some of them might object if it was their company, but if it's some other companies, it's like what is there to see here? And that's too much of sort of cherry picking of the thing. Yeah, if we don't like the particular decision, then we'll make it a free speech issue. But if we're okay with the particular decision, it's not a free speech issue. But there's deeper philosophical issues here that, one, there's confusion on, but often it's worse than confusion. And one of the wide issues here, the way I think about it is, they think of freedom of speech as just an intellectual issue that pertains to intellectuals. And I'll put journalists, reporters into the category of we deal with the realm of ideas. So a university has to be free, a newsroom has to be free, journalists have to be free. Government can't be telling them what to do. But businessmen, they deal with money, wealth, profits. The government can tell them to do whatever the government wants to tell them to do. So can you merge? Can you not merge? Can you get a license or not a license? Yeah, that's all fine for the government to do this because that's interference with, or control, put it better, that's control not over ideas, but over money, commerce, trade, profits. And of course, government has to have control over that. It shouldn't bar everything and so on, but it has to control all of this in the name of the public interest. And that what is happening now to any real thinker, that is someone trying to understand and trying to see like there's something bad going on here. And it's not that hard to see the connection between Trump wanting to control speech and using the antitrust threats of, well, and the FCC, like the FCC chairman's pretty open about this. Yeah, I'm going to really scrutinize this merger because we don't like what they're saying about Trump. It's like if you can't see a connection between these two, that the fact that the government has so much control over money, commerce, business, these business entities, that impacts freedom of speech, and like in a major way. You don't have to be a genius to see there's some connection here. And if you're not really thinking about that and thinking, well, maybe there's a big problem that government can license companies, decide if they can merge or not, and these companies have to go to the FCC for permission and approval, and sort of they have to beg, and if the price of that is, okay, we'll settle this lawsuit with Trump in order to get this merger, like, it's being reported that's like these news agencies reporting that. So you can't see, yeah, like maybe there's more of a connection between these two issues in regard to freedom of speech then the way that you are thinking about it, as I say, like any thinking person, they might not be able to get the full answer to this, but if they just still think, oh no, but freedom of speech is just about the realm of ideas, and the realm of trade, commerce, business, that's just a different thing. It's not plausible to hold that view given what's going on now.
Yeah, and if it's, I mean, part of how I think about this is if it's not plausible, then, you know, what is really going on with somebody like Harvard who's objecting so strongly to these things? Like, what are they really after? Right? Are they after freedom? And it seems to me like that can't, like, are they really after freedom of speech? And it's like that can't really be true, because what they're also after is for all of those businessmen to subsidize their research, which comes down to like specific sets of ideas, directions for what ideas are plausible, what ideas are not, that the businessmen might not know about, and they might, even if they knew about it, they might disagree with, right? And they're still after that.
Yeah, and here too, the democratic justification will rear its head, but here too, and if you're talking about Harvard, you're talking about like very educated people, you're who should be able to see at least there's something I really have to think about here, and that's so the kind of justification the democratic would be, well, yeah, okay, this is taxpayer funded. We're not like literally going into businesses and siphoning their money from their accounts into Harvard. It's people vote on this, and it's taxpayer, and um, and so like we get it through legitimate legal ways. But then it would be, yeah, but that's true of the Trump administration's elected and so on, and now they're changing all the rules and regulations, and they're saying we're not funding this, and why is that not legitimate? If you think of it, it's like these are democratic decisions to be made, and that they hold in one case, no, like this shouldn't be subject to vote, and we should be able to have and hold the ideas that we want, and this is part of what Harvard is saying in response to the Trump administration. But like, why doesn't that apply then to the businessmen? It's, yeah, but the people might vote to take their money and give it to you, but they don't want to do it. And why shouldn't a businessman be able to say, no, I don't want to do this. I don't really care if 55% of the people vote that I should be forced to do this. And they're not facing that issue.
One of the things that it reminds me of is in Atlas Shrugged in part two, when, you know, James Taggart has been getting like all of these subsidies, all of these favors from the government for the entire book, and then I think it's like Clem Weatherby at this board of directors meeting sort of holds that power against him, and he sort of realizes like he was the public for a long time, and now he's not, and there's something very uncomfortable, and that he sort of rebels, and he it's like he's twisting and turning around that. And I sort of like, I think there's some kind of analogy here as well with.
Yeah, I think it's more than an analogy. I think that is part of what is happening, and part of so as you put it in Atlas, but let's fill in the details a little bit. That so Jim Taggart he's the CEO of a major company that like economically in the setting of Atlas Shrugged, it's a major company, and he's able to get subsidies and favors and laws passed against competitors. So like the antitrust, and it's put very much like he's, oh, that my competitor's anti-competitive, so we're going to put him out of business. And he's always like on the recipient end of the like he's getting favors and so on, and other people are losing. And now what happened later in the story, it's okay, now we no longer view you and your company as, you're not representative of the public, other people are. And now instead of them being sacrificed to you, you're going to start being sacrificed to them. So he's lost this magical title of I count as the public, but the unstated corollary, but it's important that it's the logical corollary. I'm the public, other people are not the public. Like, even though we're all citizens, and in one sense, we're all like members of the public, but for in the sense of the public interest, it's my interests count as the public interest. Your interests don't count as the public interest. And this is part of what Ayn Rand said. The only meaning of the public interest is it's a claim that I, as a private individual or private organization or sets of organization, I count as the public, and my interests are going to trump other people's interests. They're going to be sacrificed to me. And so part of it, if you take it for the media companies, the universities, they've thought of the government as thinking of them, and not without reason, of thinking of the, yeah, like our best Ivy League universities, you represent the public, you're part of the public interest. And so, yeah, we're going to have tons of taxpayer dollars that are going to fund your research and your teaching and so on. And the media companies thinking, yeah, like we're basically sort of on the side of the government. And like if you look at media companies' criticisms of Trump versus Biden, there's right that there's something to object here, that they're much more sympathetic. They ask fewer critical questions. They do less investigation of the administrations they like the Biden administration, versus administrations they don't. And there's a kind of cozy relationship that, I mean, just think of on the free speech issues, the kind of coverage of the Trump administration now versus the coverage of the Biden administration during COVID, when they were putting incredible pressure on, here was more the social media companies than things like CBS, but incredible pressure. And the media wasn't very interested in that. They're still not that very, even though many more of the details have come out. So they're still not that interested. And that's like, it's, yeah, we're all part of the public interest, and like we watch each other's back, and so there's that atmosphere. And now they're being stripped of, no, we don't feel like it's clear the current administration, we don't view you as representative of the public, we view you as harmful to the public interest. And so now, instead of you're going to get tons of money, we're going to start taking away this money and this funding. And there's an element of that they're incredulous. I think that there's just like, what's happening? Like, how can we be stripped of we're the public? And again, any real thinker has to think, or should be thinking, like if you're really trying to understand the situation, is, yeah, but didn't other people feel like what we're feeling like? When all kinds of businesses, their money was taken from them, and they don't want to fund Harvard and so on, but they're made to fund Harvard. Shouldn't they have felt like what we're feeling like now? And if you can't project that, you're not seriously thinking about the situation. And that, so yeah, I think the wider atmosphere is institutions that for so long think of themselves as holding the mantle of, yeah, our interest or the public interest. Other people's interest, yeah, that might not coincide with the public interest, but ours is the public interest. And now you have an administration that's saying, no, we don't view you like that. And they don't know what to do.
So, so we've talked about a number of different issues so far, and yeah, I'm interested in sort of zooming out a little bit and seeing like where are we and sort of where are we going? Like if you imagine like plotting points on a curve, like what does the arc that we're on look like?
Yeah, I'm interested in what you think about this. My view is the most ominous aspect of it. So I think it's an arc like you can think of it going up if you're thinking of government control. You can think of it going down if you're thinking of it as we're supposed to be a free society, and what kind of freedom and to what extent is remaining on. And here we're particularly focused on free speech, but and the intertwining of free speech and antitrust law. That so from that perspective, I think we're descending. It's getting worse, and part of it is because there's no opposition on either side. So in each case, they want to more and more use the government to target specific content and speech they don't like. So here, with the Trump administration, it's things as we've been talking about, things like Harvard and CBS, and we think you're promoting or making Kamala Harris look a little bit better than she would have looked if you just aired an unedited interview, and nobody airs unedited interviews. Like I mean, it's a fart, but they're targeting it because of content. But the Biden administration targeted the social media company for specific content. Like, we think this is wrong about COVID and wrong about vaccines, and this will make people do things that we don't like, and so they put a lot of pressure on them for specific content. So both sides are doing it, and there's no internal criticism in either camp. So I'd have some sympathy for the Democrats if there was some real soul searching post COVID, and now with Trump like maybe what we did was really, really bad. Like, maybe what the Biden administration did, and he's not even the head of the party anymore. Like, maybe what we did was really bad. If they did some of that, I would say, okay, maybe there's some hope for them, but they don't seem at all concerned with the fact of what they did when they were in power and what the Biden administration did. And they used antitrust. And now on the other side, it's basically, yeah, if you're going to do it, watch us do it. And it's both. Like, we're going to target for specific content. And the basic difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration is the Biden administration tried to do it behind closed doors. And I think that's simultaneously worse and better. It's worse from the perspective of it's harder for the citizens to know that it's happening. And that's really, really bad, because then you have a decision. Do you like what the government's doing? Are you going to vote for this again? Should you have voted for Biden? But if you don't know it's happening, you can't make that kind of decision about that. But it's better from the perspective of they know there's something unseemly about it. Like, the reason they do it behind closed doors is they don't want to do it in public, because it's too obviously flouting the First Amendment. Like, if you're telling social media company, take these posts down and we don't agree with this, and then it's too obviously, yeah, you don't care about the First Amendment. And the Trump administration, it's much, much more open. And from a certain perspective, it's, yeah, if you vote for this, you deserve it. Now, unfortunately, it applies to the whole country. So even the people who didn't vote get it. So, like, that's not a justification, but that it's more open. You're more informed that this is what the government's doing. Do you agree with it or not? But it's worse because it's like openly defiant of the First Amendment. We don't care about the First Amendment, and that, like, it's better for someone to think, yeah, I shouldn't be doing this, so I'm going to try to hide it, than somebody thinking, who cares about the First Amendment?
So when I'm thinking about this myself, I sort of hold it a lot more tentatively. I mean, if you're talking about points on a curve, I haven't seen that many points yet. Like the 2024 election, I think that was the first election where I really felt like in control of like my mind and my like really like in a sort of an adult perspective on an election. And so a lot of it's, yeah, I remember some things from the old, from 2020, 2016, and a little bit from 2012. But, that's part of why I asked this question, is because, like, I can see a rate of change, and it's like, whoa, this seems fast, but it's like, is it just the same rate of change that we've been on? Um, what one thing I will say in the sort of arc of history sense, though, is you know Ayn Rand, which I think it was the essay "Choose Your Issues" or something like that. She brought up antitrust and freedom of speech, and I think, was it the FCC specifically that she brought up?
Yes.
Yeah, she brought up both of those things as like, if you want a free society, you have to fight these two things, and um, yeah, there's in terms of the arc of history, it's yeah, those two, like I the more that I think about it, it's like, oh my god, like how right was she about that?
Yeah, and it part of what she's talking about, choose your issues, or what are the important political issues. So she's writing that in the early 60s. What are the important issues to focus on for both their immediate and long-term consequences? And it's the FCC and antitrust. And both of those are resurfacing. So if you're drawing a points from the 60s to today, I don't think it's a straight um, disintegration or a straight downhill curve. No, and far from it when one's thinking about free speech issues. And it's partly for good reasons and partly for a kind of lethargy. So the FCC was more powerful in the 60s than it is now because its power wasn't extended. So its power was over broadcast licenses, and like that doesn't include cable even. It doesn't include cable, and it doesn't include the internet. And if you think now of the dissemination of information and news, it's I mean, it's probably broadcast is third in terms of those uh, cable, and certainly internet. Like internet is the clear top. And if the FCC had power to control the internet, and you had to get license and so on, we'd be in a very different situation than we are now. But it's sort of, they didn't extend the power, and I think partly for some good reasons. There was some understanding that's an interference with freedom of speech, but some of just, you have to be able to pass this kind of legislation, and you have to get often like some bipartisan support and so on. So it was just harder to pass this. So the FCC has much less control than it had in the 60s. Like it's. I can still remember the time of, like, there's three major networks. There wasn't even Fox News, so there was ABC, NBC, CBS, and all have to go to the FCC to get licensed. So the control the government had over dissemination of news and information was much more substantial than it has now. But the ominous, so that's part of, so there's like, it got better in part for political reasons and in part for technology reasons. It's just the technology exploded and they couldn't control it all and regulate it all and take government control over it. But the ominous issue now is that there's more will, it seems, to want to do that. Like, if you want to use the FCC power, as both administrations are doing, and if you want to use antitrust, then the logical next step is, shouldn't we try to expand the powers of these things? And for sure there was that push with the Biden administration over antitrust. It's like, we haven't been using antitrust nearly as much as we should be using it. So let's and here you don't really need to pass the new laws versus just put in all kinds of mechanisms to expand the power to execute on antitrust. But for something like the FCC, you would have to expand its power. But that both are willing to do this means that unless there's some real opposition, it's already has gotten worse from what it was, and it portends to get even worse because they are flaunting their use of this power.
Okay, so thanks, Onkar. That was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I think it's a good place to call it. So, some resources that you might want to look at to learn more about the topic. I brought up Atlas Shrugged earlier in the podcast. And it's part two, chapter 5, where Taggart's magic title of the public interest gets taken away. I mean, I think, well, obviously, I think Atlas Shrugged in general is worth reading. But if you look at that section, I think that's really illuminating. In Censorship, Local, and Express, that's another whole forum talk where Rand describes, the obscenity cases going back into the 1970s, how, the standards used there, which sort of, as I understand it, they've changed somewhat since then, but they've, provided the legal basis for censorship in this country, and it's some of the same kinds of things that are at work in the FCC case. And then another one is Have a Gun, Will Nudge, where Rand describes sort of how the mixed economy, which is freedom alongside elements of government controls, how this is paving the way for censorship, and it will pave the way for censorship if they're not opposed. So, thanks, Onkar.